Hey, good morning, Jeff Benna.
Andrew, good morning. Big news this morning, or last night, I guess, at midnight.
Yeah, I feel like right now there's like a freight train of information, news, uncertainty coming at us. It's crazy what's going on, the world we're living in. But in all the years I've been selling real estate, this might be it as far as just turbulence and uncertainty, and people have a lot of questions. And so you and I being at the
Absolutely.
forefront, like we are the boots on the ground. So if anyone wants to know what's going on in the real estate market, they should talk to Hassman or Bennett because we are the ones that are walking through open houses, talking to our buyers, talking to our sellers, having to sort of answer their questions, deal with their concerns. Like we are on the front line.
Absolutely. And when I was watching the tariff announcements and whatever's going on there, now officially in place on all Canadian goods going to the US, I recognize I'm not really qualified to say what effect that's going to have on the economy. I think back to early 2020 and people said, "Oh, well, what's going to happen to the real estate market if we have a pandemic?" And I rather glibly suggested that, well, pandemics don't make prices go up. And you know what? I was exactly wrong. So my lesson learned, stay in my lane and can comment on what it might mean for markets. And that's generally they don't like uncertainty. But that said, where there is uncertainty, there's often opportunity. So I don't know what you're seeing right now. We've had quite a few buyer transactions in the last little while, people stepping in and taking advantage of lots of choice, lots of time, plenty of opportunity to do their due diligence. People that need a place to live, like if they need permission, like go ahead and buy it. Like this seems like a pretty good time.
You know what? I think it is. And it's that old saying, be greedy when the market's fearful and
Yeah.
be fearful when the market's greedy. Well, right now the market is fearful in many respects. But I think you have to, again, just sort of take a stand back and go, okay, if I'm a buyer, am I buying a piece of property or home or whatever it is with the idea of selling it in 1 or 2 years? Or am I buying it for a 5 or 7 or 8 year period where I might at that point need to sell it again? And that's the way you should be looking at it. If it's a long-term purchase, if it's your home, try to take the noise out of the market and just think what your long-term plan is. And you're so right, Jeff, is that when the market is like it is right now, when you go to open houses right now, there's not a lot of shoes at the door. There's elbow room when you walk in. There's not a lot of people out there. It's definitely a lot quieter. And I know that the sellers, some of them, especially the builders and the developers, are hungry for your business. They're
Yes.
willing to negotiate. This is a great time. Think about all the years in February, March, when the market is going gangbuster. You get to the open house with your clients. There's 26 pairs of shoes at the door. You open the door and you can't even move in there. And you're thinking like, this is just crazy. I mean, that's typically what Vancouver's like in the spring of any given year, except for this year.
Well, Sundays 2 to 4 used to be like, Friday night 8 to 10, right? You walk into a house, it's like, "Wow, here's all
Oh,
my
house party.
friends. It's a good
Well,
time. See everybody.
yeah. Yeah.
Catch up with the buyers that have been looking at every single open house that both of them that have been available. And now certainly, like you say, it's a lot
Subdued.
more easily sort of managed. You don't have to be so emotional about it. You can be a little bit more logical. And the thing that I always come back to is you need a place to live. Go ahead and buy something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your requirement for accommodation and shelter is not going to change because of a tariff. That's just where it is. And
And
so for purchases that are a little more discretionary, uh, sure, you know what? I think timing matters in those situations, but if it's your residential home, just go ahead and buy the thing you want.
yeah, you made a point a minute ago, or a couple minutes ago, Jeff. Where are we qualified to answer really what the impact of tariffs is going to have on the real estate market? Probably not. But again, if people are out there, buyers or sellers, and really want to get a gauge as to what's going on in the real estate market, they should talk to us because we are on the front line. And there's no question that when you have what's going on right now, you have uncertainty. Markets don't like uncertainty. So we can only sort of give you our gut feel as to what the vibe is in the marketplace right now. Long-term trajectory, that's probably not where we're qualified. But we can
Yeah.
tell you right now, I think there's definitely some opportunity if you've got a long-term holding period. And if you are out there looking and you're thinking you need a home to buy because you've just had a baby, or whether you're downsizing, upsizing, and you're thinking of being in your home for the next five years plus, then it doesn't really matter. I think right now you can negotiate, you can take your time, you can do your due diligence for once. And I think it's a great time. So we're seeing people out there looking. We've got clients that are like yourself. We've actually been quite busy with our buyers. But a lot of people, you ask them what they're doing. If they're buyers, oh, we're going to wait. We're going to wait to see if things pick up. And they'll be back out there looking when the market's going busy again, which is kind of the wrong time again. So, this is the time to do it.
We're advocates for action if you're buying. We're doing our part to lift them.
I love this time. 30 years in the business, this is so rare to see the market in February as sort of subdued as it is. I also think actually we're in March now, so let's talk about March, but in February, and I think part of the February issue was the first 2 weeks in February, we had all the snow and the ice. It was freezing cold. Vancouver isn't like back east when it snows here and it gets really cold. People go into sort of into a panic mode and don't want to go out. It's too slippery, whatever. So I think a lot of stuff didn't come on the market. People held off, really smart, I think. And I think buyers also held off because there was too much snow on the ground. It was too icy. So that probably had a bit of an effect, there's no question, to what happened in February with respect to the level of activity. Because it took everyone, now we're looking at the stats, and there's no question, February didn't act like it normally would, considering time of year, right, in Vancouver.
Well, and let's talk about it too. If you're on the other side of the equation and you need to sell right now, what if your home's on the market, it's listed for sale, or worse, maybe it's expired? I heard a stat on the Rennie podcast. Yes, we do get information from other places.
Just buying out there. Yeah.
I think those two guys over there at Rennie are super smart. Ryan and Ryan, they're really on it. Okay. Great in-depth analysis. So this is not a plug for them, but just a little point of admiration. One of the stats that they had mentioned on the last podcast was that of the new listings that came on in January, I think I'm quoting this right, is 40% of those had been on the market last year. So there's a lot of people out there who maybe had some trouble getting their place sold, relisted, or come back on either with the same agent or maybe with a new agent back into the market. And I think to a large degree, when we saw all the listing volume in January, and we'll get to that in a minute, I think a lot of that was people who hadn't been successful in the fall and still need to get their house sold. So I was having a conversation with a client of mine, listener of the podcast, in a different market. And he asked me, how does the assessed value relate to sale price? What does priced right mean? And so we thought that would be a great topic for today after we do sort of a little shallow dive on what's happening in the market.
Yeah. Well, again, going back to the surge in January listings, again, I'm sure, and that doesn't surprise me, a lot of those listings that came on in January were relists from unsuccessful attempts in 2024, maybe even 2023.
Yes.
And don't forget, the last quarter in 2024, we saw a nice pickup in activity. Interest rates were on their way down. Back end of September, we saw the market start to pick up. October, November, pretty good. December, not bad. So people thought, oh, market's improving. Let's hit the market. It's January. And so all of a sudden we see this inventory surge. I'm wondering if a lot of that surge as well, though, Jeff, was also pre-sale condos that had completed, because a lot of stuff is completing now and people putting their places on the market. We're involved in a development that completed in December. It's a commercial strata development, so it doesn't get recorded in the residential. But there were like 40 new listings pop on in January in this commercial strata development in Vancouver, all from completions. People completed in December. As soon as a lot of these are investors, and they're all of a sudden they're on the market. So probably the same for residential pre-sales that hit the market, as far as the reason why the condo inventory surged as well, right?
I'm sure that's a big piece of it.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know, in that development, are a lot of them putting like a dual listing, like for lease or sale?
I'm one of them. I got my place for lease and I got it for sale. Whatever happens first. And so my commercial broker told me, he said, Andrew, right now there's 50 units on the market. So I've been thinking there's like more than half the building is for either for resale or for lease.
Yes.
So yeah, a lot of people. Yep. People that went out and bought this property, just like they bought pre-sales during the pandemic, 2020, 2021, interest rates were rock bottom. thinking, oh, what a great deal. We don't need to put 15% down. When it comes time to close, we'll close on it. We'll lease it out. We'll rent it out, whatever. All of a sudden now interest rates have gone up and things aren't quite as rosy. So you got a lot of investors thinking, maybe it's time to cash this thing in. And so they're running for the exits. And so we're seeing a lot of surge of this pre-sale inventory that probably represents condominium developments that have now just recently closed and people
Yes.
putting them on the market. They don't want to be an investor. The investor client right now is that market's, it's difficult. I mean, there's so many rules and regulations. So these people are maybe cashing out.
Yeah. And I think along with that, a lot of those COVID era renewal or mortgages are now coming up for renewal over the course of the last couple of years. So anytime you see a big jump in expenses, anytime you see a big jump in uncertainty, anytime you see a big jump in inventory, all of a sudden you need to really be paying attention to what's going on in order to get your listing sold. If you're on the market and you want to be sold, you've got to really zero in on the data and see what's happening there.
One thing I do notice, Jeff, driving around, so let's shift over to the detached.
Yes.
Drive around the west side and the east side, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but again, we see what's going on. I don't see a lot of for sale signs out there in front of houses. I don't see like, oh my goodness, there's 4 houses for sale in that block. You can drive down blocks and blocks without seeing a sign. So I don't see a lot of supply. Like in the west side, it doesn't jump out at me. There's a lot of listings. There are maybe a few more signs, but nothing dramatic. So
Well, I agree with that. And, to our point that we make quite often is that for a nice, livable house, quiet street, great accommodation, maybe a basement suite, nicely renovated, ready to go. And there just aren't that many of them. When we look at the inventory numbers for detached homes, west side and east side, I think a large part of the elevated levels that we've seen, it's all that land assembly stuff. Like you'll have a dozen, you'll have 15, a couple of sets of 6, like
on the busy
that
streets,
adds up. Like every
yeah,
homeowner on a busy street is basically in the development business now,
Yeah.
and they're all on the market and trying. And so, well, the real estate board is actually in the process of doing this. They're going to make a separate
category.
section for land assembly properties. And once they do that, I think we'll get a little bit more realistic measure of what the actual inventory is on the market.
I'd love to know what that is because I'm sure a large percentage of the homes, single detached, that are on the market on the east and west side are these busy street land assembly houses, which aren't going to sell to mom and pop with 2 kids to move into. These are all going to developers.
Absolutely. And I know just from doing my market analysis, when
Yeah.
we're going out to see a property, you'll throw out half of the
listings.
listing comparables simply because
They're
they're
now,
land assembly. They're not relevant. They don't measure.
yeah, that makes total sense. So let's go back to BCSS values, sellers saying, we get this all the time, Andrew, Jeff, I'm not selling my house below the assessed value. And of course, on the buyer side, we're not paying any more than assessed value, right? So let's lead into that. Jeff, what are your thoughts on that? What determines really what market value is relative to assessed value? Is assessed value market value? Give us some thoughts.
So, as is my custom, I've completely ignored all the relevant information. Just kidding. I've actually done a bit of a deep dive on some of the homework because it is something that comes up very often. So the first question I wrote down is, what is the BC assessment and what does it do? So provincial crown corporation, and it's responsible for determining and maintaining accurate property assessments for all real estate in British Columbia.
Okay.
So then the individual municipalities, they use what's called a mill rate per thousand, and that's how they calculate the property taxes.
Property taxes, yeah.
So the
Yeah,
assessment
yeah.
authority does not deal with the property taxes. They just provide the valuation. And BC Assessment annually assesses 2.2 million properties every year. And they do that with a series of, they look at sales data, market trends. Sometimes they do site inspections, self-reporting by owners. Sometimes homeowners can submit details about their property voluntarily. I actually haven't ever heard of somebody doing that, but the option is open for them.
Once in a while, you get a phone call from BC Assessment. They'll see a sale. You were involved in the sale, or I was involved, and they want to get some extra data on the sale because maybe the sale jumps out, just so that they can sort of figure out why the sale was at the price level it was at. So they do reach out on occasion. Yeah.
And the first question they ask is, was that an arm's length transaction? If it was
Right.
very low,
Yeah.
or if it was very high relative to the assessment, they say, well, was there something special about it? Like,
Yeah.
was it all gold plated railings and whatever? But they do that. Uh, Primarily, though, they use computer assisted mass appraisal. So basically, a statistical model that predicts value based on market trends. And then they take into factors also interest rates, inflation, flood risk, wildfire, that sort of thing. So, how accurate is it? Because it's the same thing, like how many times have you been sitting with a buyer and say, I'm not paying any more than the appraised value? That's the absolute measure of reality. Well, okay. And
Yeah.
then, you're talking to a seller, I'm not selling for less than assessed value. That's the absolute measure. So I think for the most part, they're fairly accurate, but probably not as accurate as a buyer who's parting with their own money, who's seen other properties and wants to purchase a home. You know,
I'll interject for a sec. I tell
yeah,
people, as my response is, I say, look, you guys, the assessed value is a ballpark estimate of market value.
yeah,
The assessor probably hasn't gone in and done the full analysis like that we might do when we do our comparative market analysis, but it's a ballpark estimate. What it doesn't factor in, but I'll also stop them and say, look, as well, you guys, that estimate is as of July of last year. So
yes,
it could be 11 months out, it could be 8 months out, and the market changes. So what you see on that assessment was 8 or 9 or 6 months ago, but it also doesn't take into account an emotional factor. A home
yes,
that's beautifully staged, the garden's in impeccable shape. It's very inviting when you walk in, the smell of fresh baked bread. Maybe
yes,
there's 22 other groups in there at the same time. So all of a sudden there's this emotion, the buyer's building some emotional component into the decision. None of that's in there. It's strictly just hard numbers. And so people have to understand that it's just a ballpark estimate. When your realtor knows their stuff, we should be able to sort of say, okay, well, that's what the assessment came up with, but I've got 3 or 4 really good recent neighborhood sales to sort of help you understand why I think this property could be worth X amount in the current market, or to the seller, why we think it's going to sell for this amount. So when you know your market, you know what's going on in the market, you can take that assessed value and then adjust accordingly for current market conditions, emotional factor, and maybe taking into account recent area sales to come up with what the true market value is of course, within a range.
100%. And when I look at it, their assessment to sales ratio compares the assessed values to the actual sale price. And for their purposes,
Yeah.
a ratio anywhere of 90 to 110% is considered accurate. So, like, I'm trying to imagine a seller being happy with a 20% range on the value of their home. Well, we think it's going to sell somewhere between,
Yeah, and 3.6.
2.5 and
Yeah.
3.1,
Yeah. Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah. No, that's
that's
not going to
considered
work.
accurate.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I know the single family strata residential properties last year, it looks like it was somewhere just close to 98%, 97, which eight, but that 3% higher low, it can make a pretty big difference, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, what happens if the seller before listing has repainted, changed the appliances, maybe put a new kitchen cabinets in? Typically that is never reflected in assessed value. But, a 1980s kitchen versus a 2025 kitchen with all brand new appliances is going to command a very substantial lift in market value, which isn't shown in the BC assessed value. And that's just the kitchen. What if they've done the bathrooms? What if
Yes.
they've redone the basement suite? They put all new lighting in. They fixed up the garden. So none of those things are shown in assessed value. So the assessed value is a ballpark,
Yes.
and buyers and sellers should understand that. And again, as professional agents, you and I should be able to explain really what the true market value is within a tight range based on recent sales in that neighborhood, and comparable relevant sales, not ones that aren't relevant.
Well, and
Yeah.
this is exactly it. So the correlation between assessed value and market value, like you say, the BC assessment is really just numbers, algorithms. I think each one of the assessors at the authority is responsible for about 5,000 properties. There's no way that they've gone out to look at everyone and treat
Correct.
everyone, and all the renovations and work done if it's all cosmetic, but you drop $400,000 or $500,000 in your house on your assessment, the value for the physical home is still going to be $40,000 if it's an older thing.
Yeah.
Like, it just doesn't rate. We find a lot of times, as you described, in a rising market, the assessed values will often lag behind. So they'll actually be too low because
Yeah.
the sales for the current assessment were done in the spring of last year to get ready for that July 1st date. In a declining market, which we've seen a few times, the assessed values are actually trailing coming down. And so the market and the sale prices will be less than what your assessment is.
Yeah.
It does, though, I feel, have a bit of an influence on the selling property, because many buyers, they look at that and they say, oh, well, that it sort of gives them confidence to say, oh, somebody else feels that this is worth this much. It isn't just me. It sort of pushes some of that responsibility for making a decision. It's one of the guardrails, I guess, that we use. And so I'm always perplexed at people who, well, not perplexed, I totally get it, when they appeal their property assessments. And I think, yes, appeal your property assessment if you're going to be there for a long time.
Yeah.
But I know people that have successfully done this year after year after year after year, and they've ended up with, I think, maybe an abnormally low assessment. And then when it comes time to go on the market, they're like, oh, well, why is the assessment so low?
Yeah.
Well, he successfully bought his assessment every year, but
Yeah.
you're almost, if you're going to be selling a super high assessment, totally out of, balance, just because we know the buyers do look at it. They say, well, this is what I want to do. So
Better to keep it high, right? Better to keep it high.
a little bit. So
Yeah.
you do pay extra taxes if that's the case. And
That was the question I had, Jeff. If you appeal your property tax assessment and let's say they lower it by a couple of percent, does it bring your taxes down? Does it actually change your property taxes?
so it does, because you're charged that percentage of your total assessed value.
Fair enough. Okay. So
Yeah.
you're actually saving a bit. It must be minimal. Like it's negligible, I'm sure.
Well, it's whatever the mill rate is. So,
Yeah.
if it's 0.001% and I don't know exactly what the number is, but
Got it.
if you brought your assessment down 100,000, you'd probably pay, I'm guessing, a couple $100 less in tax, maybe.
Whatever the
Yeah.
percentage drop or whatever. Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
When you go to sell your house, it might cost you 50,000 because you're having a tough time rationalizing up the.
There's no question people do object to the property tax assessment and they'll appeal it. I always think it's better to keep it high because, again, it helps justify potentially a slightly higher price when you come to sell it, or at least if the assessment's higher, it just gives you a better argument to hold your price, I guess, maybe a bit higher. But again, at the end of the day, the property's worth what it's worth based on recent area sales.
Exactly. And
Right,
you know
so-
what? We do use the assessments in all our comparative analysis.
Yeah.
What we generally say, and I know, like, for condos, just because there's a lot less differences
Yeah.
in sort of the work of them, because generally they're newer and they're a little bit easier. They tend to be a little bit more accurate.
Accurate. Yeah, I agree.
But they're accurate in that they're all similar in their inaccuracy. So, like, a lot of times, for example, we're doing an evaluation in a particular condo building, and we have a half a dozen properties that have sold. We look at their sale prices and we look at all their assessed values. Oftentimes you'll see a trend where, like, oh, everything is selling right at or slightly below the assessed value. And then you can compare the assessed value of the suite that you're looking at. And through that, you can get a pretty good idea of where things are going. Other times you'll see a lot of sales and the assessments will be way below or way above, but there'll generally be a trend that they're all quite similar.
You're basically trying to determine where they're selling relative to your assessed value. Are they an average of 3% over, 2%, or whatever? And that helps you sort of extrapolate for when you're looking at the subject property as well to see where their assessed value is and where there's, I totally get it. And that's what we do. We do the same thing as well. And
Yeah.
the same thing for houses. Houses can be a little bit less accurate because, again, of if it's an old house that's been renovated and nicely remodeled, it may not be reflected in the assessed value. So then you'll see the assessed value be way below really what it's going to sell for. The selling price could be substantially higher than assessed because it's not factoring in updated kitchens, a brand new roof, all that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when I look at that and I say, okay, what's my main takeaway from all this? The assessments are just one more piece of the puzzle when we're trying to establish market value. And market value is simply what's a buyer willing to pay in an arm's length transaction after a reasonable time on the market.
Yeah.
And I go back sometimes to the saying that if the map and the ground don't match, the ground is right. So if the assessment and the market don't match, the market is the true diviner of what the actual value is.
Yeah. Informed buyer, informed seller, arm's length transaction. Usually, if you have enough market data, that would be recent sales, recent listings to go by, you then usually can come up with a realistic listing price and expectation of selling price based on what's going on in the current market. BCSS value is just a ballpark estimate, and you can use that, compare it to the other assessments of the homes that sold to try and extrapolate and figure out if it makes sense. But every home is a little bit more unique. And again, you've got emotional factor, improvements that may not be factored in that can skew away from BCSS value. So
Exactly.
yeah. But again, as professional, experienced realtors, you and I are like the best qualified when people come to us looking for advice on how to price a home or how much to pay for a home. As experienced agents, we should be able to come up with that without too much difficulty, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
When we talk about the concept of being priced right,
Yeah.
it's a term that we use all the time as realtors, but the true meaning is actually more tied to market conditions. So in a liquid market, we actually know almost instantly whether a property is priced correctly. Like the minute you turn it on MLS, we get a printout of how many people have viewed the listing, how many match searches, the phone starts ringing, or it's very quiet. And so it's almost instant. The measure used to be that after 3 weeks on the market, usually one of three things will have happened.
Yeah.
It'll be sold and everybody will be super happy, or you'll have had a bunch of showings, maybe some offers and a lot of sort of feedback, and then maybe you're just a little bit too high, or you'll have been on the market and it'll have been very quiet. You won't have had many showings, no inquiries, and no offers. And then you know that it's a little bit less accurate. And I would say with all the technology, how buyers are searching for properties now, like they're finding out about it, it's not dependent on a realtor calling them and saying, "Oh, hey, did you see Joe's listing over on XYZ Street? We need to get over there and take a look at that one." The actual process has been reversed now, where all the automated searches go out, and now it's the buyers who
Calling
put
the
that
realtor.
information.
Yeah.
Then they're calling their realtor saying, "Hey, oh, wow, did you see that one over on XYZ Street? We want to go and take a look at it." So
Yeah.
with that technology, it's taken a lot of the human friction out of identifying properties. And so I would suggest that probably even within a couple of weeks, if it's priced right or not, assuming it's a liquid market and a regular kind of a house.
And that's what I was going to bring up. So let's look at February. And also, if I recall, before the market picked up in the fall, so last summer, the market was pretty lethargic around here as well. Property would come on the market, and I remember this. First few days, no calls. First week, not really any calls. And then about week 2 or 3, start getting a few calls. And I kind of think February was like that as well. You put property on the market, you wouldn't get many calls. It was pretty quiet. And that to me told me, well, hang on a sec, maybe it isn't a price issue. Maybe there's just not a lot of buyers out there looking right now. It's pretty quiet. The snow kept people indoors. People really weren't out making appointments to look at properties. It was just quiet. And so I think one needs to recognize that when the market is just really quiet, where buyers are on the sidelines waiting and just sort of watching, not a lot of transactions being done, it can take longer for us to determine whether something is priced correctly or not. Like in a hot market, within the first 10 days. If you're not getting calls and showings, yeah, totally, that makes sense. But in a quiet market where buyers are on the sidelines, just sort of waiting, not a lot of people out there doing showings because there's not a lot of buyers, it can take a little bit longer to determine whether or not we're priced right or not. And I'm saying that because I have a listing right now where I've priced it under the assessment. It's a lovely home.
Yeah.
Lovely home under the assessment. There's nothing even close to us for this home. And it's quiet. Yet we did an open on the weekend. We were actually quite busy. So I'm thinking like a lot of people aren't maybe making appointments. they're just waiting to go to the open house on the weekend. So again, it's an interesting time. And I think right now, and I'll go back one point as well. If you look at the average prices from where we are today from a year ago, we haven't really seen a lot of price change. Prices haven't dropped or
We're
risen
not.
much. We're plus or minus 2%. So as far as I'm concerned, as of today, we see price stability in the market. There's no big correction out there. It seems to be
No.
fairly stable in general terms, right?
Yep.
So it's just a lot quieter. People are on the sidelines, lots of them waiting because of all this sort of uncertainty. But it's taking a little bit longer, I think, when we're trying to determine whether something's priced right or not in the current market, because I don't think there's a lot of buyers out there. So we need to be a little bit more patient just to determine whether or not we need to price adjust or not.
Well, and that's confirmed in the average days to sale is
Yeah.
much higher than it has been in the past. Where in a lot of times where it's sort of 45 or 60 days. And usually that's on the heels of it's on the market for a few weeks. Then there's a price change. Then it actually sells once you've hit that sort of magic number. I
Jeff,
think it's
I wanted to
important too.
know-
It's not always, I mean, I'm reading Charlie Bunger's book, Poor Charlie's Almanac. And one of the quotes that he says in there a number of times in his speeches is, to the person with a hammer, every problem is a nail. So the same thing. Anybody can burn down the barn. It's
Right.
like, it's as well as price. How's your entire sales strategy? Is the home well presented? Is it in good condition? How's the marketing? Does it show the home's strengths? How's the accessibility? Is everybody's expectations aligned with market reality? So when we look at a property and we're not getting the exact results we want, the first thing we do is not to say, oh, it's the price, forget it, just get it down.
Yeah.
We think that we're probably going to lead there, but we want to make sure and exhaust every other option. So retake the pictures, reorganize the furniture, call the home stagers, paint the room, fix the carpet, whatever needs to be happening, manage the accessibility, put a lockbox on it so people can get in there if it's vacant. Like, just
Yeah.
make it easy, easy, easy. Take all the frictional possibilities out of the equation. And if it still doesn't sell, then maybe there's a price adjustment,
Maybe
right?
the price. Yeah, no question about it. You want to make sure that everything presents absolutely perfectly. And you made a good point on accessibility. If people can't get into the property because it's rented and the tenants aren't cooperative, or there's only showings twice a week. We called on a property for some clients this week, and they actually said to us, oh, yeah, we're not doing any showings until we get an offer. So it's one of these subjects. You make an offer, you get an accepted offer, and then they're going to come and let you go in. Well, that's not going to work in this market. No one's interested. There's a lot of condos on the market.
Yeah.
That's not happening. I mean, that maybe happens in a very, very ramped up, busy seller's market, but that's not working in this market. So we just passed on and went to the next one. But my clients aren't making an offer without seeing the property first.
No, they want to
Yeah.
go and see it, take a look.
Yeah. Jeff, I wanted to point on one thing. We haven't talked about it because markets differ. Well, we talked about this before, that when we talk about the market, what's going on, general terms. But I wanted to just point, I did some stats this morning. I was kind of curious what was happening at the high end of the market. So the high properties. So I went 5 million plus, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't sort of talk about this end of the market very much. So I did Greater Vancouver, 5 million plus first 2 months of the year, January, February. So
Yeah.
just a quick analysis. Going all the way back to 2021. So in the first 2 months of 2021, 54 sales.
Wow.
And then each year it's gone down slowly. This year, first 2 months of the year, 2025, we're at 18.
So about 9 properties per month, over 5 million.
Yeah. And that's Greater Vancouver.
Oh, that like the
That's
whole
in that-
board.
That's Greater Vancouver Regional. Yeah, the Greater Vancouver Board. Yeah. So
Did you check and see how many active listings there are right now?
I did not. I'm sure there's way more now. I'm sure it's gone up dramatically. I'm sure there's a lot of high ends, but again, it's gone from 54 sales in 2021, 54 in 2022, 37 in 23, 29 last year, and 18 this year.
Wow.
So the high end is a little bit soggy up there.
Yeah, number of transactions down by 2/3. That's big news.
Yeah. Well, again, and a lot of high-end real estate out there, right? So that's a tough market. So we've definitely seen, I think, in that end of the market, some areas where there's been some fairly substantial price decline at that
Yes.
end of the market. But again, that's not the average market. That's just one segment I wanted to sort of point out.
And there's the opportunity, Andrew. Like, and I know this isn't for everybody, and not everybody's sort of buying homes in that price range, but if you're sitting in a place and you think the value is somewhere approaching that, and you have the means, you've had a liquidity event, something's happened. Let's just say that happens sometimes. You've inherited some wealth from somebody who's passed away. Like, that's a reality of the market. Now might be a great time to take advantage of softness at the high end and quite a bit of activity in the more affordable end.
Yeah.
And make that trade up. Like, if you're going from 3.5 to 6 or 4 to 7, it's a massive leap, but that difference has
It's
never
come
been
down.
less based on what we're seeing and what's happening in the numbers, right?
There's no question that some of that big high end stuff, not all of it, but some of that product has come down by some substantial amounts. There's no question. So yeah, the gap is definitely narrowed for those people that have the financial means at that end of the market. But down in the 2 and 3 million range, houses, east side, entry level west side, I think that market to me seems pretty stable again. Pretty stable.
It's very brisk.
Yeah.
We've got buyers looking, and when we've had listings that have come on that kind of product, it's been instant action.
Yeah, we just had something in Point Grey. Hasn't sold yet, but we're still waiting on rescission. 5 offers on it the other night, all unconditional. So, and that's in around the 3 million mark. So again, because there's not a lot on the market, good house, great location, great school catchments, this and that. Buyers recognized it to be priced correctly.
Yeah.
And so there you go. And you don't have to look at that many properties when you're looking in a certain market as a buyer to really get educated pretty quick. So I would say if you look at 6 or 7 houses within a certain neighborhood area in a similar price range, you can usually walk in after that, looking at that many, and decide pretty quickly whether the next house you're looking at is priced fairly or not. Like, it doesn't take much to get educated on the market. And that's why, BC assessment or not, you can walk into a home, you measure it up compared to the other homes you've seen, and you know pretty quickly whether or not the home is priced correctly or not.
Yeah. If buyers have a visceral reaction, like
Yeah.
as soon as they walk in the door, the one grabs the other one's elbow and says, "This is it.
Yeah.
Get your checkbook out." And it's just like that because they're parting with their own money. It's a home that they're going to live in. They've got so much skin in the game. They are the best arbiters of value that exist because
They're the ones writing the check, right?
yeah,
They're the ones writing
the
the check.
stakes are very high for them. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I totally agree with that. I think my main takeaways are the assessments are helpful. Market value is determined by buyers. There's opportunities in any market, and trading up, regardless of where the market is, this might be an option. And even if you're just trading at the same level, but a different kind of property, like if you're in a new home on a smaller lot or a townhouse, and you're thinking, oh, well, I'm going to get something that has a little bit more land share and maybe a little bit less house that I'm going to renovate. A lot of times making that trade, the price point is almost the same.
Yep.
But you're getting into something that over time will likely appreciate more in value.
More land value, but more land component. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. No question about it. So we're now at the beginning of March. We've got this new tariff reality.
Yes.
So obviously March is going to be a real pivotal month. It's going to be interesting to see what happens during the month of March. I think we're going to start to see things again, just slowly right themselves. I don't think it's going to be a gangbuster month, but I think we'll see obviously a bit more activity in March than we did in February because probably won't have any snow this month. The reality of tariffs will slowly sink in. People have to get on with their lives, obviously.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see how March performs relative to January and February, because February, again, was obviously a little bit more lethargic than we thought it was going to be, earlier in the year. I actually came out, if you remember, you and I had a discussion on December 31st. I said right out of the gate, blue skies ahead. The market's going to, I think, get off to a good start in the year. It did. It got off to a very brief good start in January,
Yes.
only to see it run out of gas and sort of sputter at the end of January into February. So again, lots going on, lots of uncertainty, but I think Vancouver's market always seems to be pretty resilient. And I think as we get into March, longer days, better weather, the tariffs becoming sort of just, more of a reality, I think things will sort of slowly trend back to where they should be for the month of March relative to February.
I'm hopeful you're correct.
Yeah.
I think there's an element of fatigue about all the uncertainty. And we've said it before, if you need a new home, you can't wait forever.
Yeah.
If you've got an extra home or too much home, you can't not move forever. Things happen. We're agents of change. Change happens. It tends to just follow along from there.
I wanted to make one point. I think there's a lot of real estate investors out there that bought properties, secondary properties. Mortgage renewals are happening.
Yes.
It's now putting them into negative cash flow. So the
Yes.
rents aren't covering the mortgage payments. A client called me this past week, having to service it every month, almost $2,000 a month, negative cash flow. How
Yes.
long does someone want to do that for before they either say, okay, we're going to put more money into the mortgage to bring the mortgage down, to bring the payments down, create
Yep.
break-even cash flow, or cut and run, meaning sell the property and get rid of it? Because $2,000 a month out of your budget just to service negative cash flow,
Oh,
for a lot of people, it doesn't sit well.
that's
And
a big chunk.
and is not affordable, right? So I think there's a lot of that happening. That's why you're seeing a lot of these condos hit the market. These are investors that bought pre-sale. They're in negative cash flow situations, rent's not covering. And so that's going to be an interesting thing going forward to see how that all plays out.
Andrew, the other thing that we're seeing a lot of is the short-term rentals, furnished rentals,
Yeah.
Airbnb style rentals. The cash flow that was previously available for those, now that they can't do it anymore,
Gone.
we're having conversations every other week of, oh God, you know what? I was getting 5,000 or 6,000 a month out of this thing. Now I'm getting 3. I paid a big price and
Negative cash flow.
I just can't do it now.
Negative cash flow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So eventually those will come on and they'll have to be sold. The motivated seller, the motivated buyer, they will continue to act and execute in the market and things will continue to sell and move along.
and determine market value. Jeff, always fantastic talking to you this morning. I was looking forward to this morning because there is
Thank you.
a lot going on out there. There's just a lot of everyone has the same question. What's going to happen? Well,
Yeah.
we don't know. We can only tell you what's going on the front lines. It's not doom and gloom. It's just a
No.
trickier time, but we think there's opportunity out there. So for those that have the ability, I think there's some good opportunity in the marketplace.
This is a great time to be doing a lot of things.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Trading
Cool.
up, buying a place, selling a home. Like it can't be all things to everybody, but if there's a purpose to it and there's something better on the other side of it, we can help you sell, we can help you buy, and you can take advantage of whatever opportunities are occurring for you right now personally, right?
Couldn't have said it better myself, Jeff. We will look forward to talking to you in a few weeks and we'll see how March pans out.
Andrew, wait, we got one more thing.
Oh, okay.
Did we do the disclaimer?
You better do that before we get sued. Go ahead.
Standard disclaimer. We want to offer relevant, actionable information. That said, this isn't investment advice, and we're better realtors than accountants, lawyers, and financial advisors. Full disclosure, we are owners of Vancouver Real Estate. Shameless plug, if you use a commercial space and you're interested in leasing or buying, call Andrew.
Good call.
That's right. And we like it when prices go up and we make a fee when we help you. So thanks everybody so much. This is Industry Vancouver.
Look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, Andrew. Talk to you later. Bye. Thanks for tuning in today. We appreciate your time and your attention. If we can be of further help or information, we look forward to hearing from you. We respectfully acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.